It was a winter night in 1939, somewhere on the English coast. The room smelled of dust, solder, and nervous energy. A young engineer stood before a panel of skeptical officers, clutching a stack of diagrams that looked like nonsense to everyone but him. His name was Robert Watson Watt, and he was about to propose something that sounded like science fiction. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I can show you aircraft you cannot see." The room fell silent, then erupted in laughter. A colonel scoffed. "You want to find airplanes with radio waves? Absurd. We need more fighters, not fantasies." Watson Watt didn't argue. He simply pointed to the map of southern England and said, "If I'm wrong, we'll lose the next war before it begins." He left that room humiliated but undeterred. Within a year, the system he designed, the first practical radar network, would expose Germany's entire invasion plan before a single bomb fell on London. And in doing so, the man they called the crazy engineer would become the unseen architect of Britain's survival. By the late 1930s, Europe was unraveling. Adolf Hitler's armies had rolled across Poland and France with terrifying speed, introducing the world to a new kind of warfare: blitzkrieg, lightning war powered by coordination, mobility, and fear. Entire nations had fallen in weeks. Britain now stood alone, an island fortress bracing for an invasion it could not see coming. The Royal Air Force, RAF, was small, brave, and blind. Fighter Command could scramble Hurricanes and Spitfires into the sky, but they never knew from which direction the German bombers would appear until it was too late. In the calm hours before dawn, British radar was not a word. It was a myth. The only warning system was the human ear, observers along the coast straining to hear distant engines through the wind. Inside this atmosphere of dread, a handful of scientists worked quietly in laboratories that smelled of ozone and burnt circuits. At the head of one such group stood Robert Watson Watt, a Scottish engineer who believed that the key to defence lay not in the number of aircraft, but in the speed of information. While generals argued about fighter production, Watson Watt was drawing waveforms, trying to see with radio. In 1934, Britain's Air Ministry had issued a challenge. Could radio waves destroy enemy aircraft from a distance? Watson Watt's answer shocked them. "No," he said, "but they can detect them." It was a subtle shift in thinking, one that would prove far more powerful than any death ray the military imagined. His proposal called for a network of tall steel towers along the coast that would emit pulses of radio energy, then listen for echoes reflected from aircraft wings. If timed correctly, those echoes could reveal not only presence but distance and bearing, and it sounded insane to officers who still believed in cavalry and binoculars. But a few visionaries at the Air Ministry saw promise in the madness, and by 1935, Watson Watt's team at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, TRE, began the first experiments in a windswept field near Daventry. No one could have guessed that what happened there would change the course of human history. February 26, 1935, Daventry, England. A cold mist rolled over the empty countryside as two men set up what looked like a collection of radio towers and guesswork. On a nearby hill stood Robert Watson Watt and his assistant Arnold Wilkins, staring at a cathode ray screen glowing faintly green in the gloom. Miles away, an RAF bomber, a lumbering Handley Page Hayford, began its test flight. The experiment was simple on paper. Transmit a burst of radio energy, wait for it to hit the aircraft, and measure the echo when it bounced back. But in 1935, no one had ever seen such an echo. If the beam returned, it would mean that invisible waves could reveal invisible threats. Watson Watt's hands trembled as he adjusted the dials. Static filled the air. The beam pulsed out into the grey sky. And then, faintly, A rhythmic flicker appeared on the screen. "There!" Wilkins shouted. "It's moving!" A bright pulse crawled across the scope, perfectly matching the bomber's path. They weren't guessing anymore. They were seeing through the air itself. For a moment, the two men simply stared, overwhelmed by the scale of what they had done. No bullet had been fired, no explosion heard. Yet the principle of a new weapon had been born, the weapon of awareness. Within weeks, the Air Ministry authorised full development of what would become the Chain Home network, a series of radar stations stretching from Scotland to the Isle of Wight. Each tower could detect aircraft more than 100 miles away, feeding data to central control rooms that tracked enemy formations in real time. It was crude, fragile, and underfunded, but it worked. Britain now possessed something no nation on Earth had: eyes that could see beyond the horizon. Watson Watt, the crazy engineer, suddenly found himself leading a project so secret that even most RAF pilots didn't know it existed. While Luftwaffe bombers trained for annihilation, Britain's coast was quietly sprouting forests of steel towers, silent, patient, watching. The invention was not glamorous, and it didn't roar like a Spitfire engine. But when war came, these invisible waves would decide who lived and who burned. By the summer of 1940, Britain was a nation waiting for the storm. France had fallen. The Low Countries were under Nazi control. Across the Channel, German divisions gathered like thunderheads, preparing for the final blow. Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's plan to invade the British Isles. But before any ship could cross, the Luftwaffe had to clear the skies. The coming battle would be fought in the air, and the side that saw first would win. In Berlin, the German High Command was confident. Their intelligence described the Royal Air Force as small, scattered, and blind. Their plan was simple: bomb the airfields, destroy the radar towers, and crush Fighter Command before it could react. It looked perfect on paper. But there was one flaw. Britain already knew the plan. Inside a dim operations room at Bentley Priory, the nerve centre of RAF Fighter Command, coloured lights and sliding markers moved across giant maps of southern England. Women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force pushed counters representing squadrons and raids. Every symbol on that map came from a chain of radar towers humming quietly along the coast. Towers that saw the incoming raids hours before the first bomb fell. Every time German reconnaissance aircraft tested British defences, the radar plots revealed their pattern: same altitude, same direction, same timing. Watson Watt's system turned chaos into geometry, and geometry into strategy. The British could now predict when and where the Luftwaffe would strike. This wasn't luck. It was science turned into foresight. Soon, another intelligence miracle joined the network: the secret ultra-code-breaking operation at Bletchley Park. As the mathematicians there deciphered fragments of the Enigma cipher, radar data confirmed what the messages hinted at: the exact structure of the Luftwaffe's attacks. The radar towers were not just warning devices, they were windows into Germany's mind. When the first full-scale raids began in July 1940, the system worked with astonishing precision. Radar detected formations assembling over France. Fighter Command calculated flight paths, wind drift, and altitude. Controllers calmly vectored squadrons of Hurricanes and Spitfires into perfect intercept positions. The Germans, who thought they had the element of surprise, found British fighters already waiting at altitude, as if guided by prophecy. That prophecy was radio detection and ranging, radar. And every time the Luftwaffe changed tactics, the radar network adapted. When they tried night raids, Britain upgraded radar frequency and linked it with sound detectors and visual spotters. When they attacked low, new chain home low stations filled the gaps. By September, German reconnaissance photos told a grim truth. Instead of chaos, they found coordination. Instead of confusion, efficiency. Hitler's generals could not explain how the RAF always seemed to know where to be. The answer lay in a line of coastal towers, rusted, humming, ignored by most pilots, that had silently exposed the entire logic of Germany's hidden war plan. The radar system had turned Britain into a fortress of information. And information, not firepower, was what kept the island alive. Summer 1940. The sky becomes the front line. The war that Hitler had promised would last only weeks had dragged into its most decisive test. From the white cliffs of Dover to the rolling fields of Kent, the sky above Britain turned into a vast, living battlefield. Every morning began with the same ritual at Fighter Command Headquarters, a hum of voices, the clatter of telephones, and the soft buzz of radar operators calling in sightings. Raid detected, bearing 110, Angels 15, speed 250. In those calm sentences, entire squadrons lived or died. As the radar plots streamed in, the vast table at Bentley Priory came alive with movement. Coloured markers represented German formations, hundreds of bombers and fighters crossing the Channel. Small counters of red and blue represented Britain's defence. At the centre stood Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, watching silently. Every decision he made had to balance exhaustion, fuel and fate. Dowding had built his entire strategy on Watson Watt's invention. He understood that Britain didn't have enough aircraft to cover every city, but with radar it didn't need to. He called it the system. It worked like a living organism. Radar towers detected incoming raids. Information centres calculated heading, altitude and strength. Fighter controllers vectored squadrons precisely to intercept. Pilots climbed into battle already in position, already waiting. For the first time in history, a nation fought with networked warfare. The chain home system was the world's first digital nervous system. Long before computers, long before the term real-time data existed. Technology meets humanity. The young men flying Spitfires and Hurricanes rarely saw the towers that guided them. Many didn't even know how radar worked, only that somehow someone always seemed to know where the enemy was. A pilot named Geoffrey Wellham later wrote, "It was as if the sky itself whispered warnings to us. We were never truly alone." Those whispers were born in the static of radar screens, bright blips moving across phosphorescent green. In darkened coastal bunkers, women barely out of school stared into the glow, tracing each blip by hand, calling out range and bearing to controllers who relayed it to the airfields. They were invisible heroes, fighting a silent war in the dark. The turning of the tide. By August, the Luftwaffe began to realize something was wrong. Their carefully planned strikes were failing. Every raid encountered British fighters perfectly positioned to intercept. German commanders accused their pilots of leaking information. They couldn't comprehend that the British could see them coming before they crossed the coast. Frustrated, the Luftwaffe turned its fury on the radar towers themselves. For a few days in August, Stukas and Me-109s screamed down upon the coastal masts, tearing steel and cable apart. But the system proved astonishingly resilient. Crews repaired damaged stations within hours. New towers went online before the next raid. Even when blind, the network filled in the gaps from neighbouring stations. It was the birth of redundancy, the first lesson of electronic warfare. When German bombs finally fell on London, Britain was bloodied but unbroken. Hitler's invasion timetable collapsed. His air force, once invincible, now faced pilots who fought with knowledge, not luck. The Battle of Britain ended with the Luftwaffe's retreat. the first major defeat of Nazi Germany. The invisible weapon triumphs. After the battle, when the statistics were tallied, one fact stood above all. For every British fighter lost, 2 German aircraft were destroyed. Against overwhelming odds, the RAF had survived. And at the heart of that miracle was not just courage or machines, it was information. Watt's crazy radar had turned data into defence. The unseen pulses of energy along Britain's coast had become the rhythm of resistance, a heartbeat of survival. The victory over the Luftwaffe was not the end of radar's story. It was only its beginning. From the ashes of Britain's narrow survival emerged a technology that would soon cover the entire globe, from secret weapon to Allied doctrine. In the months following the Battle of Britain, technical delegations from the United States arrived quietly in London. They came under the name Tizard Mission, led by British scientist Sir Henry Tizard, carrying a small black metal box wrapped in cloth. Inside was the device that made British radar possible, the cavity magnetron, a palm-sized component capable of generating radio waves 1,000 times more powerful than anything America had yet built. It was the single most valuable piece of technology Britain possessed, and they gave it away. In laboratories from Massachusetts to California, American engineers studied the magnetron with awe. It allowed radar to shrink from 100-foot coastal towers to compact systems that could fit inside aircraft and ships. Within months, the United States was producing airborne radar that could see submarines under the moonless Atlantic, detect incoming bombers, and guide night fighters to invisible targets. The crazy Scottish engineer's idea had become the nervous system of the Allied war machine. The Atlantic, the war beneath the waves. For years, German U-boats had terrorized Allied shipping, surfacing under darkness to cut the vital supply lines between America and Britain. Conventional patrols were useless. The ocean was too vast, the submarines too silent. But with radar-equipped patrol aircraft, the balance shifted overnight. When the first liberators, equipped with microwave radar, took off from Newfoundland, the hunters became the hunted. Now U-boats that surfaced to recharge batteries found themselves suddenly illuminated on invisible screens. Depth charges followed, and steel coffins sank to the bottom of the Atlantic faster than Germany could build them. Churchill later said, "The Battle of the Atlantic was the only thing that ever really frightened me. It was radar that ended that fear." The Pacific. Eyes in the storm. Half a world away, the same technology transformed another theatre of war. In the Pacific, where vast distances and sudden weather made navigation nearly impossible, radar gave American carrier groups a kind of omniscience. Japanese air raids, once devastating, now ran headlong into fleets already prepared. At Midway, Leyte Gulf, and Okinawa, radar-guided intercepts saved thousands of lives. The American destroyer USS Fletcher, fitted with an advanced surface search radar, recorded one officer's astonishment. "We no longer fight blind. We fight with ghosts whispering in our ears." The new face of war. By 1945, radar had evolved from a desperate British experiment into the defining advantage of the modern Allied military. It guided bombers across enemy skies, directed artillery through clouds, and even landed aircraft at night. More profoundly, it marked a philosophical shift in warfare. The realization that victory belonged not to the strongest army, but to the one that could see first. Watt's original chain home towers had been dismantled or replaced by then, but their principle, the integration of data, detection, and decision, became the blueprint for every military system that followed. Air defense, early warning, and ultimately, the digital networks of the Cold War. When the war ended, Britain celebrated its heroes, the fighter pilots, the code breakers, the soldiers who stormed beaches and skies. Few remembered the quiet engineer who had given them the power to see through darkness. Robert Watson Watt returned to his desk, not a conqueror, but a man haunted by what he had helped unleash, a world where invisibility no longer existed. The man behind the signal. Watson Watt was not a flamboyant scientist. He was a practical mind, a man who preferred results to rhetoric. When politicians demanded miracles, he reminded them of reality. "Give me the third best to go on with," he once said. "The second best comes too late." That sentence defined him. He never waited for perfection. He built what could work now, because war would not wait. His radar network wasn't elegant or precise. It was messy, patched together, unreliable on paper. But in practice, it worked better than any dream of perfection could have. He had proven that invention in crisis is not about brilliance, it's about timing. A life measured in echoes. After the war, he was knighted by King George VI for services of exceptional value to the defence of the realm. He travelled, lectured, and quietly faded into history. He never sought wealth or fame. What mattered to him was that his invention had saved lives, though he also knew it had opened a door to a new kind of warfare, one ruled by detection, signals, and machines. In one of his later interviews, he said softly, "If I have given mankind the means to see, I pray he learns when to close his eyes." By the 1950s, radar had evolved into missile guidance, weather forecasting, and the early computers that would later define the age of information. The chain home system became the ancestor of the global early warning networks that watched the skies during the Cold War. In a very real sense, every blinking radar screen, from air traffic control to spacecraft navigation, carries the echo of that first signal at Daventry. From madness to vision. When Watson Watt died in 1973, his gravestone bore a single inscription chosen by his family. He gave us the means to look into storm. It was not just a reference to weather or war. It was a metaphor for human vision itself, our eternal struggle to see beyond fear, beyond ignorance, beyond the visible. History is full of geniuses whose inventions destroyed as much as they created. Watson Watt's gift was different. His invention had saved a nation, and in doing so, it proved that intelligence, the kind born from humility and urgency, could stand against brute power. He was the quiet mind who made the world less blind. There are wars fought with fire and wars fought with light. Robert Watson Watt fought his with neither, only with clarity. In 1939, he proved that knowledge could be a weapon more powerful than steel. His radar did not destroy armies, it revealed them. It turned terror into geometry, chaos into coordinates, fear into foresight. And in doing so, it taught a generation that the greatest victories are won not by strength, but by understanding. Every pulse that left those coastal towers carried more than electricity. It carried a belief that human intellect could stand between civilization and darkness, that one spark of insight, born in a laboratory, could shield a nation from annihilation. Today, radar hums quietly in every airport, every ship, every storm tracker. Its sound is not heroic, it is steady, patient, human. It reminds us that progress is not born from genius alone, but from courage, the courage to see what others call impossible. In the end, the story of radar is not about machines. It is about a man who looked into the storm and taught the world to see.